women were revered. And then along came the Jews and were trying to oust the feminine or the goddess-based religions. They were trying to enforce their belief in Yahweh. And all of the ways that women were once worshipped, that was then turned around. So in the story of Adam and Eve, there are similarities with how it was in the goddess, in the times when the goddess was worshipped. So the goddess always had a temple, and the priestesses were the female servants of the goddess. And so in the Adam and Eve story, Eve is a priestess, and the priestesses used to have snakes in the temple. They always had a snake pit, and they believed the snakes were the bearers of wisdom. And they also saw the snakes as the symbols of eternal life because they could shed their skin and not die. And the priestesses were often seers and prophetesses. So they would listen to the wisdom of the snakes and then give prophecy. So here that we have in the Genesis version of that we see Eve listening to the snake and being told bad things, whereas when the priestess was listening to the wisdom of the snake in the goddess's temple, she would have been told things that were helpful or healing to the people that were asking for her prophecy.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. It is, isn't it, how it got just twisted around?
Yeah.
And something that always fascinated me was how come Adam and Eve covered themselves up with fig leaves and yet they ate from the apple tree? Like, where did the fig leaves suddenly come in? Where were the fig trees all this time? And then I learned that in the goddess's temple, they had sycamore fig trees, and the people used to eat the figs in the goddess's temple, and for them it represented the flesh and the fluid of the goddess. Isn't that beautiful?
Is this similar to the narrative of like Lilith and the priestesses of Ishtar?
I was going to ask that.
Okay.
You hear Lilith a lot now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's coming back into the sphere of our attention. I love it. So Lilith was considered to be Adam's first wife, and I'm still not sure. I'm still researching it. I'm still not sure if she was entirely. Well, I believe the whole Adam and Eve story was myth anyway. So I'm not quite sure when the sources were of the Lilith story. I know that in the medieval times, that's when Lilith became really quite a prominent figure. But Lilith refused to have sex underneath Adam. She wanted to have sex on top. And of course,
that
the
is
Jewish
awesome.
patriarchs did not enjoy this notion that a woman could be on top and could be in the dominant position. So Lilith wasn't welcome in the Bible at all. And then she was twisted into a screeching demon that strangles babies. That was how Lilith was vilified, because she was disobedient to Adam.
They ruined everything.
Yeah.
I think it's see, I didn't know that about the original story, and how it was twisted around. I think that is fascinating, and it's very I think topical to kind of what's going on, especially over here in the States, this kind of empowerment to women, with the whole Me Too movement, and they're not ashamed to come out, and which I think is awesome. I'm all for that, and I think that stories like that, it's kind of good to hear nowadays. It's almost like kind of a morale boost, because this has happened before. There was a time where they actually did push down and take away rights, and you got my mind going about 900 miles an hour. It's weird to me that we were able to go originally from a time where we exalted women, thinking that they brought man to the world, they gave birth to the earth, and then somehow we lose that, and we make it so that they can't vote. And it's only been less than a century ago that they were able to actually vote on their political leaders. Like, how do we go from that extreme to this extreme? And there's one defining, I think, answer to that I'm not even going to ask, because it's the elephant in the room. When the stronghold of religion gets involved.
Yep. Well, it was about 6000 BC. So the goddess religions prevailed in the Middle East, in the Near East, and then there was invasion from Indo-European tribes from Georgia in Russia, the Caucasus mountain range. And they were warriors. They were warlike people, and they had warlike gods. So these Indo-European tribes invaded, and they settled wherever they invaded and gradually introduced their gods, which were male and warlike, and gradually ousted the feminine or the goddess-based religions. That's how it happened. And the Jews were part of the Indo-European tribes. So they had that male warrior god as part of their background teaching.
And imagine it, we could have all probably got along if we'd have just left things alone. There wouldn't be such a divide.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, it's just interesting to me because so at one point there was a matriarchy that we worshiped the goddess, and then that was changed around and we had to worship a male god. And now I believe that we're coming into a time of partnership and reconciliation, and the Me Too movement is all part of that. It's all about making stuff conscious. It's been unconscious. It's been in denial for all these years, been kept down and suppressed because God forbid that we would topple the male god. God forbid that we would take power away from the men. So, but the feminine is rising, and that's the kind of the evidence of it for me. The Me Too movement is the evidence that the goddess is coming back, but not to have another matriarchy. I believe this is our evolutionary path, that it's time for masculine and feminine to be reconciled and work together in partnership.
Why is it so controversial, you think? Because the feminist movement is one that it seems to strike sort of a controversy with different sects of, especially on the internet, like with the whole YouTube community. I mean, there are hour-long discussions that go on about feminism. Is it beneficial? Is it not? Why the just controversy over that issue of making everybody equal? Why do you think that's fought so hard against?
Well, Kyle, before you ask that, kind of determine what you mean by feminism, because you're describing egalitarianism more than feminism. And that's one of the problems on YouTube, is that the word feminism means different things to different people. Like, I am not consider myself a feminist because I don't like the fourth wave feminism, or even the third wave feminism. But the second wave, I think I don't know anybody that fights against second wave feminism, of course. And that's more of egalitarianism. So when you use the word feminism, what are you meaning by it? Because that's one of the big thing on YouTube, is that people use that term to mean different things.
Sure. I think that, my definition of feminism is, I guess I'm just a regular individual when I think about this, but I don't think of them in waves or sects or different levels. It's just feminism to me. I think that if you're a feminist, if you believe that women deserve to be paid equally, treated equally, not deal with sexual harassment, not feel like they're objects, if you can see them as you do your male counterparts, if you're in a marriage that you don't expect them to cook and clean and iron and do all those little things. I think you're a feminist if you see them as equal. And I don't think that there has to be complicated levels to or waves or whatever it is. And I think that's where people get into the big arguments, is because they try to sect it off. But really, it's as simple as, if you believe that women are as equal as men, I think you're a feminist. Now, would that be wrong, Stephanie? Or
no, I'm with you on that. I also honestly don't know a whole lot about the different waves of feminism.
Me either.
I know when I was a feminist, when I was a militant feminist, with my shaved head and my no bra, and
rebel, radical.
Rebel, yeah.
No, under that definition, I of course would obviously be a feminist under those definitions. That's the classical approach to feminism, and I think that most people, unless you're some kind of patriarchal idiot or some kind of misogynist or something like that, fall under that. I think that everybody would agree those are things that we all should have in society. But what happens is you have these extreme people, these really out there third and fourth wave feminists that people don't want to associate with. And so they don't want to take upon that label of feminism, because then people might think that they're associating with those types of radical feminism rather than the ones that Kyle just. Well, but that's YouTube. that's the things that's going on YouTube. And there's something to be said about it. I mean, people don't want to affiliate with some radical groups, but if you're just talking about everything you said, reproductive rights and legal rights and equality, equal pay, that's all falls under the second wave feminism from about the 60s to the 80s. And of course, again, I don't know anybody that would ever actively say those things are wrong. Who would fight against that kind of stuff unless you're just a dick? I mean,
you'd be surprised.
No, I've seen a couple people. Those are the people that I think are radicals in themselves, right? Because if you don't think that women and men are equal, there's just something wrong with you. I don't even know what to say to something like that, because obviously there are differences, but equality across the board as far as how we interact with society. Men and women are equal in those regards.
You know, it's interesting to hear you speak, Steve, because you say that you can't understand people who would think that way, that women are less than, and yet that's what the Bible tells us to think. That's the whole part of the Adam and Eve story, that women are subservient to their husband and they have to please him whether he's good to them or not. And unless someone's really examined their deeply conditioned beliefs and religious background, there's not a lot of hope as far as I'm concerned. You really have to come to grips with, a person really has to come to grips with, okay, this is what I've been taught. Is it true? And if it's not something that's loving for me and loving for everybody else, or good for me and good for everybody else, it's probably not true. But it takes courage to throw off those old belief systems and habits of thinking. So I have compassion, really. I have compassion for people who might be judged as limited or narrow or stupid. It's just that they have not yet had the courage to examine their beliefs. And they may never have the courage in this lifetime. Do I want to fight them? No, I'm not interested. It's a waste of energy. Yeah. Let them evolve in their own sweet way, you know. Yeah, I don't want to go near them.
There's definitely a lot of rationalization when it comes to the Bible, as far as what you said. Obviously, in the Bible, women's rights were not a big thing. Slavery was a thing. It was not indentured servitude. It was a literal form of slavery. The slaves were treated less than human. I've had people try to argue against that. However, what I read into the Bible, they were property. They were chattel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so when you know, it's funny you mentioned like the earlier story of the of Lilith and stuff like that, because that was one of the original stories. Lilith did not want to be put down under Adam. She wanted to be equal, and so she actually cheated on him with this archangel Samuel. And those offsprings later became in the canon demons. So all the demons are supposedly like from Supernatural. Great show if you haven't watched it. I guess those are all the combination of Lilith and Samuel. I don't know if that's the narrative on that show or not, but that's where that story came from, is that Lilith did not want to be subservient to Adam, and therefore she cheated on him with an archangel, and then their offsprings were demons. Interesting story on that, though.
Very interesting.
Yeah, you see how much women have been vilified. And how, so Lilith wanted to have sex on top, and that wasn't acceptable. And suddenly she's the mother of demons. I mean, she's not just a woman who has a choice or a preference. She's the mother of demons now.
Yeah, right. She was vilified after that. Yeah.
Today, I think men would probably beg for that to be the case.
I'm not going to argue. Yeah.
Now there. Here's another good segue, I guess. This is probably the most controversial question that I have to be honest with you, Stephanie. When I read this question, I said, "Oh, I cannot wait to hear her answer to this." And even as somebody who is now a complete atheist, like I don't believe that that gods exist or any of the stories in the Bible, but even this question kind of made me go, there's somebody that actually will answer this, because it's a brave question. Was Mary, the mother of Jesus, actually a virgin?
No, she was not.
You heard it here. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's so. Even now, and again, I think it goes back to that whole that switch that they plant in you. That, well, don't wander too far off the path, because even reading that question and me being, totally loud and proud that I don't